to the Dean Obeidallah show. Right now, very happy to have on the show Congressman Colin Allred, a Democrat representing the 32nd District in Texas. He's now the Democratic nominee for the U.S. Senate in Texas to defeat Ted Cruz this fall, and we are all going to do whatever we can to help make that happen. So, Congressman, nice to see you. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, first of all, I mean, you're in Texas. Obviously, the big news yesterday, President Biden signed executive orders to deal with asylum, even temporarily closing the border for people coming through, but reaches a certain threshold. What more can you share about it? And what's your reaction as someone who does represent Texas?
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on, Dean.
Sure.
My family's from Brownsville, actually. So that's the very tip of Texas on the U.S.-Mexico border. My grandfather was a customs officer. My mom, my aunt grew up there. I spent a lot of my childhood there. So, for me, it's personal what happens in our border communities. And I don't see them as political backdrops the way I think, unfortunately, Ted Cruz uses our border. I see them as a place where real people live. And what we have seen at the border is largely an asylum crisis. What I mean by that is when we have these huge surges of numbers that we did have last year, but that have gone down this year, and these folks are seeking asylum, but 90% of them are going to be rejected. But the wait time is going to be 5, 6, 7, 8 years until that's going to happen. That's why we needed to respond congressionally and have the Senate bipartisan deal that was worked out by James Lankford and others. That was the right approach to that.
Right.
And so to me, this is an effort to try and do some of what that bill did, but without the funding that we were going to provide. And billions of those dollars were going to come to Texas. And so that's why it's so harmful that Ted Cruz took down that effort. I supported it. I've been critical of this administration at times when it comes to immigration. But if this can bring some relief, then I think it'll be the right thing to do.
And I'm glad you brought up that there was a bipartisan deal with a Republican senator negotiated with the White House. It was going to give, I don't know if record number, but a huge boost in funding and hiring border security, border agents, and also judges. Like, it really was going to help the process. And Donald Trump and people like Ted Cruz stopped it to give Trump a win. That's how strident they are with our security and also with people's lives. These are human beings who are seeking asylum, some fearing for their lives, bringing their children to start a new life here because of the threats back at home. And they don't care. They're not even human beings.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it has to be unacceptable to Texans that we have a senator who would rather have an issue to run on in November than to actually try and solve it. And that's really what Ted Cruz was doing when he took that down, because I get frustrated when I see folks like him go down to South Texas, go down to the border, and use it as kind of like they're on a political safari, like they're there to see the sights and point out things. When, like, your legislators, pass some legislation to help us deal with this, and when we have a chance to do it, and you take it down, and then you say that it's all someone else's fault. Well, listen, this is your crisis, and I don't know why Ted Cruz refuses to help us secure the border, but I know that when I'm in the Senate, I will, but consistent with our values. And I think that's one thing that in Texas we have to talk about more, which is that a secure border doesn't necessarily mean an inhumane border.
Right. It's when you listen to Republicans, the way they describe the border is like apocalyptic. Like,
right.
It's an open border. Thousands are coming over every hour, that kind of stuff. You're there in Texas. What can you share with us about what's really going on at the border in terms of crossings and what does it look like and how challenging is it right now?
Yeah, well, crossings have come down this year, but they were at record highs at the end of last year. And we have to, I think, talk about this, maturely. And that's hard to do when you have people just wanting to demagogue on the issue. But the fact of the matter is, Venezuela, for example, is in economic collapse. And millions of Venezuelans have left Venezuela. And we see a lot of them showing up at our southern border. In Haiti, we see the problems they're having with gangs taking over the capital. And they've had a very hard time stabilizing. We see a lot of Haitians showing up at our southern border. We see folks from Africa, from all over the world. And to me, that does put a strain on our border communities. But you'll also hear Texans in our border communities, whether it's Brownsville or Laredo or El Paso, who will tell you that this idea that their communities are just, riven with crime is completely wrong, right? And that's not their experience and that's not their community. But they do want help. And they do want action. And that action is something that we can do. We are the United States of America. We can have a secure border, an orderly border, and a humane one, right? And that's what I think those billions of dollars that you're talking about, that we're going to go from more CBP personnel, more immigration judges, and more administrative personnel to help us address this enormous backlog that we have of asylum claims, and to faster process asylum seekers as they come, so that it's fairer to those migrants and fair to our communities. To me, that's the right solution. We, of course, do need to have a comprehensive approach to our immigration system instead of just dealing with asylum. But that's something that obviously we know, has eluded us. So, Dean, when I talk to folks, I tell them we need a short, medium, and long-term plan. The short term is the asylum crisis and the migrant crisis. We can deal with that. We can do it in a humane way. Not everyone is going to be able to stay. We can faster process folks and all that. The medium term is a comprehensive immigration reform that does make our legal immigration system work better because it's broken. It's horribly broken. And then the longer term, we have to work on stabilizing some of the countries where we know is driving so much of this migration. And we've done this before. We've helped change Colombia from a country that was once, run by, drug kingpins into, a more productive partner in the hemisphere. We can do this with some of the folks, some of the places where we see a lot of this migration being driven from.
I'm chatting with Congressman Colin Allred, a Democrat from Texas, who's now the Democratic nominee for the U.S. Senate in that state with the election in November. One of the most distressing things has been listening to Trump and MAGA, which the entire party just about left is MAGA on the GOP, the demonization of immigrants. My dad was an immigrant. He didn't come here to bring crime. He didn't come here to steal jobs. He came here to contribute to America. And then he met my mom, who was the daughter of immigrants herself, and then had children here, myself and my sister. And we do our best to contribute. I'm not bringing crime anywhere, and it is heartbreaking to hear, because in the entire discussion on the right, there's no sense of humanity. They don't view these people who are striving for a better life, who are noble people, who are going through, some are walking for months or weeks with their children, risking their lives to come to the United States of America because we sell it as such a great country, and it is at its best aspirationally. And then they are demonizing these people. And I find it, and I really wish it would be more off-putting to more Americans who understand that this is not what we should, that's not kind of language we should be using. We should be a compassionate, caring nation.
Yeah, and we also, we're the last best hope, right? As Lincoln would say. And listen, I'm a big believer in the John Lewis quote that we might have come here on different ships, but we're all in the same boat now. We're all Americans. We all came here through different means. I have ancestors who were enslaved in Texas and who came here against their will. But listen, the story of our country is that we've been enriched by immigrants. We're a nation of immigrants. And I tell folks that all the time, but I do want to emphasize this because it's very real. We're also a nation of laws. And so those laws have to be followed. But let's fix our legal immigration system as well, because one of the things that I know contributes, and I've talked to our Border Patrol personnel about this, one of the things that contributes to this irregular migration and to folks coming to the southern border and trying to declare for asylum, when what they really should do is try and have a legal avenue to try and come to the United States, is that system is so broken that they can't navigate it and don't know how to navigate it and feel like it'll never work. But there are folks, who want to come here, who are talented all around the world, who we want to come here. There are students in our universities. I have them in my universities in Texas right now, who are here on student visas, who want to stay and who can't because they don't know how to navigate that next step. We are letting talent go and turning away talent by not having a legal immigration system that works. And we're also contributing to these human traffickers who take advantage of the opaqueness of our system to tell folks, give me your life savings and I'll get you to the southern border. And once you get there, you can declare asylum and you'll be able to stay. When most of them, about 90%, are not actually going to be, their asylum claim is going to be rejected ultimately. And that's probably not the avenue they should be taking, right?
Yep.
So I want to fix our legal system, but I agree with you. We cannot, in this country, we can't give into this idea that immigrants are, as the former president has said, poisoning the blood of America. That's just not who we are.
No, I agree. And President Biden invoked the Statue of Liberty yesterday, which was very important. And I kind of sense if Trump were to win again, they would repaint the statue just white and say you have to be this color to enter this country. And those are the only agreements they want, because Trump has been documented as calling people from Africa and Haiti S-hole countries and wanting people from white countries like Norway and stuff. And it's outrageous. So let's shift gears about something very important. It's a big issue. It's very personal. It's about reproductive freedom. It's about healthcare for women. And this Supreme Court thanks to Donald Trump, who bragged, who said literally, I terminated Roe v. Wade, said, I terminated Roe v. Wade, and I got rid of Roe v. Wade. Well, he did. And women have lost a fundamental right that they had for over 50 years in our country. And Texas is almost ground zero on some of the cruelty and the excessive laws. What can you share about what's going on in the real world in terms of this lack of women having control of their own uterus at day one of conception in your state?
Yeah. Well, we just had a Supreme Court decision here that was incredibly disappointing, that basically refused to expand upon the incredibly narrow exception that we have, the only exception that we have to our abortion ban, which is for the life of the mother. And anyone who has had kids, my wife and I have had two, been blessed with two healthy pregnancies in the last 5 years in Dallas, knows that it's an incredibly scary process no matter what. But that things can happen, and that there are a lot of things that even if you can survive them, will maim you for life, or that are horrific. And the stories that we're hearing in Texas, I mean, I think it's almost hard to recount some of them because they're so graphic, they are so awful, and what women are being forced into doing in this state. And the decisions that they're being forced to make about whether or not to try and find a way to flee the state, or having to go through some horrific experience, or being turned away from emergency rooms because they have a high-risk pregnancy that's going into miscarriage, or having their ability to have children ever again, taken away, which is potentially the case with my friend Amanda Zarowski. So it's horrific what's happening here. And we have counties in the state who are is trying to say that if you drive through the county, you can't use the county roads to access an abortion. And I ask folks all the time, how are they going to enforce that? You're going to start pulling Texas women over? Is that what we're going to do in this state? And start asking them, what's the nature of your travel? And I'll tell you this, Dean, I'm a fourth generation Texan. And there's one thing I know about us. It's that we believe in freedom. And this is not it. And that's why I think this is a fundamentally a freedom issue. We have to restore freedom to Texas women and to women across this country. The only way we can do that, though, is by codifying Roe v. Wade at the federal level. In Texas, our state court is not going to do it. Our state legislature is not going to do it. I can do it when I'm in the United States Senate. We'll pass the Women's Health Protection Act. We'll go back to the standard that we had for the last 50 years in the United States, and that folks have come to expect.
It's almost intertwined with some of the language or the cruelty of the right when it comes to migrants. What they've done to women is cruel. They're literally making women plead for their own lives on the doorstep of death. And only then, if they plead enough to the GOP in power, will they bequeath upon them an exception to save their own lives. And I can't believe this is where we are in 2024 in the United States of America. We never thought Roe v. Wade, at least I didn't. And I think many of us thought maybe they'd chip away to 15 weeks. But to strip a fundamental right, when you speak to people in Texas, is this one of the big issues that you hear from voters?
It's one of the biggest issues. And I think, in fact, I was just talking to a Nobel laureate here in Texas, as a medical professional, who was talking about how this is impacting our medical schools, and who wants to become physicians in Texas, and who wants to stay practicing medicine in Texas. We are going to very quickly see that we'll start having shortages of OBGYNs, that we'll start having areas of Texas where we are undercovered in terms of ability to actually deliver children and babies. We're already seeing an impact on who's applying to come to our medical schools. It's going to impact our business community, where they're going to have a harder time recruiting or retaining top talent, because they now have to have a conversation with them. Well, if you want to have a family and something happens during the pregnancy, well, maybe Texas is not the place for you. It's going to impact every aspect of Texas life. And so this is one of these things where Texans, as I said, we believe in freedom. And by and large, my life experience here has been with a Republican Party that was largely, pro-business and would leave folks alone. This has completely changed. Now they are trying to reach into every aspect of our lives in Texas. They're trying to tell us what books we can read, what you can listen to and do, who you can love and how you can identify, when and how you can start a family. This is outrageous, and it's not Texan, right? And it's deeply un-Texan, and it's deeply un-American. And so we have to push back against this. And I think the real Texas has to stand up on November 5th, beginning by taking out Ted Cruz.
I agree. And there was a time where Republicans were for smaller government. Now they're for oppressive government. They're for a government that controls every part of your life, and they have no problem with that. I don't even know how they got to this point, but that's where they are. And I'm chatting with Congressman Colin Allred from Texas, who's also a Democratic nominee for the U.S. Senate in Texas, taking on Ted Cruz. So a couple more things, Congressman. Recently, second anniversary of the horrific shooting at Robb Elementary in Uvalde. And there was some legislation, bipartisan legislation passed. We had Senator Chris Murphy on several months ago to talk about how that's had an impact. But what more, from your point of view, should be done on the federal level to reduce the daily loss of gun lives to gun violence, and also not talked about much, but suicide? 2/3 of the daily loss of life in America involving a gun is from suicide. Is there something that can be done to address that as well?
Well, I think every parent in Texas had the same experience after Uvalde, which is that as we dropped our kids off at school the next day, we all wondered, if our kids' school could be next. And I have two little boys, and I remember seeing kind of the hollow looks in every parent's eyes the next day after Uvalde, and it was an event that was an event of mass trauma for the entire state, I think.
Right.
And it's just shocking, the idea that elementary school kids can be murdered, their teachers murdered, and by someone who should never have had access to a high-powered rifle like that. That murderer could not buy a beer, but he could buy an AR and the rounds to go with it. And so I am really proud that after that, for the first time in 30 years, we passed some legislation, the Safer Communities Act, that John Cornyn, our other senior senator here in Texas, helped pass. It would not have passed without him in the Senate. And I helped pass it in the House. And Ted Cruz voted against it. And I think, John Cornyn, that was not a politically easy thing for him to do, but I think he did it to his credit. And of course, every chance that Ted Cruz has had, he has never been a part of us trying to save lives and trying to have, consistent with who we are as Texans, which is a state that has a lot of gun owners, but responsible gun ownership that keeps people safe. And that's what I want. I want to make sure that we have is responsible gun ownership. I grew up around a lot of folks who had guns. I went to a camp from when I was 7 years old. We were learning how to handle a rifle. I know who we are in Texas.
Right.
And we have a culture of responsible gun ownership where we teach folks to handle it safely. It's part of our culture. This is not it, though. And so building on the Safer Communities Act, I think we need to, of course, have common sense steps that I think will have the vast majority of Texans will agree with, but also Americans. The one thing I do know, though, is none of that will happen if Ted Cruz remains there. We'll have to replace him to make sure that we can do that.
We gotta replace him, repeal and replace. We have to get rid of Ted Cruz. He doesn't contribute. There are senators like him. There are some Republican senators who do want to contribute on policy and make America better in a certain way. We can disagree perhaps on the direction, but at least they're about legislating. Ted Cruz is not one of those. He's about getting on Fox News or Newsmax, whatever it is, and talking on his podcast and pontificating. And he'd be better suited just being a podcast host somewhere, to be honest. He'd be very successful, not in the U.S. Senate. If you don't care about legislating, go away. Last two things is President Biden on Friday laid out a vision for a ceasefire in the Middle East with the war in Gaza between Israel and Hamas. And now, Netanyahu said he's indicated he's not on board with it, and two members of his administration are definitely not. They're going to walk away, and everything's going to collapse. What more would you like to see happen in terms of Gaza and going forward from here?
Yeah. Well, I think that the staged plan that the president laid out is the right one. And it's one that includes bringing home the over 100 hostages that Hamas still holds. And I've met with the families of some of those hostages. I've seen the pain in their eyes, and I want those hostages brought home.
Sure.
But it also would have an end to the current kinetic warfare that's going on there, and I think set us on a path towards trying to restore a peaceful situation, one that hopefully can lead to two-state down the road. And so that's what I want to see us use our influence towards, is to make sure that we have a peaceful and independent Palestinian state next to a Jewish, democratic, and secure Israel. And that, I think, has been American policy for decades. But I think in some ways, the tragedy of October 7th and this conflict has reignited that conversation and shown that that's really the only, I think, acceptable pathway is one where we work towards that. It'll take time and it won't happen overnight. But we have Arab partners, particularly in the Gulf states, who want to help with what comes next after this conflict. And the United States can play a productive role in what comes next. And I think in Israel, I think likely it will be that if they have an election, that Bibi Netanyahu will no longer be the prime minister, and that whoever replaces him, whether it's Benny Gantz or someone else, will help us talk about what comes next as well. And so I'm concerned, of course, with, I know the ministers involved who are part of the coalition that Netanyahu's put together, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. These are folks who I don't think have any plan for what could actually be good for Israel or for what happens next in Gaza. And we can't allow them to hold up a peace process that can, I think, be productive and also bring home these hostages.
And, that's something we've been hoping for a long time now, for months and months. And President Biden has tried. I mean, there have been times I've been disappointed in him, and other times he's really trying. And now you've got Netanyahu once again, his own agenda. And it's about, even President Biden said it in the Time magazine interview recently, the idea, is he extending the war to stay in power? And it seems like he is. And we get that, Senator Sanders said the same thing. So last thing, are there other issues when you're traveling around Texas that people bring up? And, is it inflation? Is it housing? Is it Donald Trump? I mean, the mainstream corporate media loves to talk about Donald Trump and convictions and everything like that. But what does the average voter talk to you about?
Well, we've had just a spate of extreme weather events.
Oh.
And we've had so many power outages and so many Texans, whether it's in the Houston area, DFW area, North Texas, across the state, who've been experiencing that. And now we're going through a period of extreme heat where we're going to have, probably the hottest summer on record. And every Texan will be asked to turn up their thermostat because the grid can't handle the load. And this is something I think is really important to talk about because when we talk about investing in our infrastructure, and when I vote to pass an infrastructure bill that's bringing $35 billion to Texas, including hundreds of millions of dollars directly directed towards trying to safeguard our grids and battery transmission and things like that. And when Ted Cruz votes against it, he's voting against our ability to handle these extreme weather events. Mm-hmm. When we're trying to make sure that we are making our infrastructure much more resilient so that it doesn't go out every time we have a bad storm, because we know it's not a matter of if that storm's coming, it's a matter of when. And NARA has said that we're looking at a potentially record-setting summer in terms of hurricane activity, and that could potentially hit Texas as well. And we've been through that before, certainly in Houston with Hurricane Harvey and Corpus and Galveston and all of our coastal areas. Mm-hmm. So we have to invest in that. And Texans are feeling this every single day in a way that I think is probably reminiscent of what happened a few years ago when the power went out during our winter storm and Ted Cruz decided that was a good time to go on vacation. And I think it's part of a larger narrative, which is that he's not going to be a part of helping us either deal with a crisis or prepare for a crisis. He's not going to help with the funding for our infrastructure. Right. And when it does hit, he'll go on vacation, right? He's only looking out for himself. And that's the feeling that I think a lot of Texans have about this guy. When I was in the NFL, we had a term for people like him. We called them me guys. He's a me guy. He's only looking out for himself. And I think, I believe in the power of we and us. And I know that we're going to get rid of him on November 5th.
I agree. And Congressman, we look forward to having you on many more times between now and November 5th to help you get your message out and help defeat Ted Cruz. It's one of the top priorities. So, Congressman, great seeing you again. And I do look forward to chatting with you. Hopefully in a month or 5 or 6 weeks, we'll check in during the summer, what's going on after the DNC, and continue again in the fall chatting with you.
Sounds good. Thanks, Dean.
Take care. Have a great day.